Thank you
So
for
yeah,
having me. I really appreciate it.
yeah, no worries. We'll just jump right into it. For those of you who may not know, Ray McKinnon is kind of like a local martial arts historian, not just for jiu-jitsu. That's not just his knowledge. His knowledge goes beyond that. But tonight we're specifically here to talk about Brazilian jiu-jitsu history in Nova Scotia. And Ray knows a lot about it and a lot about the history. So I thought he'd be a great person to have on to talk about it. So yeah, Ray, why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself and when you got interested in jiu-jitsu?
Hey guys, Ray McKinnon, predominantly a Japanese jiu-jitsu guy first. I teach a number of different styles, and I've been certified in quite a few of them. Japanese jiu-jitsu is my first style that I started training in 1975. I've done North American kickboxing, I'm an instructor in Muay Thai, shoot wrestling, Filipino martial arts, Junfan Kung Fu, Jeet Kune Do, all that stuff, whole bunch of things. But I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically when I used to run my old club, the Shidokai Martial Arts Academy. We started a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program there. That would have been around 2007 under Nathan Stevers. You probably know Nathan. He's up in Bathurst, New Brunswick now. Yeah. We were originally under, of course, Kevin Taylor, Peter Martel. And so once Nathan moved away to New Brunswick, we were kind of not sure what we're doing. And then I met with a gentleman named Edgar Luque from Brazil, myself and another student at my club, Steve Greencorn. And then we went under MXT Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so I never really trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu very much because my focus was the other martial arts that I was learning. So I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I do, it now, but I mean, just a blue belt, one stripe. And but I am a shoot wrestling coach or submission grappling coach. And but we had Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at our school for a long time. And I popped into classes when I could, but thankfully our school had a good program and students worked their way up right through the ranks, right to the black belt. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. And you've, as long as I've been around, which I started training in 2007, it would have been, I guess, around that same time. Right. I started out as a white belt. Yeah, and we got quite a few interesting questions, around the history of jiu-jitsu, and a lot of people were interested in, when were the first kind of Brazilian jiu-jitsu classes in Nova Scotia? People were asking, when did it start out? Did it start out in the 90s? Were there classes in the 70s, 80s? Right. To the best of your knowledge, when did Brazilian jiu-jitsu kind of come to Nova Scotia?
Well, I'd go back farther to I actually made a few notes, like back to 1918 when Japanese Jiu-Jitsu was in Nova Scotia, but I understand Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So really back in the early 90s, there was a gentleman down in the Truro way, Chucky Sproul, and his parents, I believe, they own Sproul Lumber, and then they end up selling it, I think, to the Irvings. Anyway, and he got involved with these Gracie cruises, because you could find in Black Belt Magazine, you could root through there and be like, go on the Gracie cruise, train Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And he got really involved with that. And from what I understand, and there's a few more people like Mike Kitston and I think Jason McKay, they all have way more knowledge on that area than I do. But he brought in a lot of Brazilians to teach. And Matt Serra was here teaching and all that stuff. But of course, right around the same time, Peter Martel, Kevin Taylor were training out of maybe their garage or something, but they originally started in below Sicilian Pizza in Fairview. And so they were kind of the first guys. Just before them, I think, there was a gentleman named Steve Burgess. Steve Burgess is a really good black belt now in New Brunswick. You probably know the name. But yeah, back then, he's a good karate guy. He's one of the nicest guys I ever met. The guy was so nice. And he started in what was called the Downsview Mall. That was in Lower Sackville. It was an old mall. And he started doing what was called Guerrero Jiu-Jitsu. But basically, he applied for VHS tapes through Carlson Gracie Jr. And you could get your tape, learn the stuff, submit your VHS tape back. And he actually, I think, started the first full-time school here in Nova Scotia. Definitely in HRM, it was full time, and guys like Kyle Sanford, Shane Rice, they all started there as well. Of course, they were young, right? I mean, Steve was young too. And so I went to his club a couple times just to meet and train, and just a super nice guy. And then I think eventually he, in the mid 90s, he left because I think he's with the military. And then, of course, he became a phenomenal Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And so Peter Martell and Kevin Taylor, really, they were the first guys in HRM. And, you know, it's funny because we just posted yesterday that I think the 72nd Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt for Nova Scotia, Brad Sullivan, I think I pronounced his name hopefully correctly. Yeah, he just got promoted. So he's like number 72. And I'd almost take a bet that 90% of people who are hold black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Nova Scotia owe their lineage somehow to Peter and Kevin.
Yeah, I would agree. And I myself started training with Peter and Kevin. I got my black belt from Kevin. That's definitely an interesting fact that, like you said, probably 98% of the black belts in Nova Scotia can trace their lineage back to them. Right. And one interesting question I got, and I think it's kind of split into two different questions, but the first one is, who is the first person from Nova Scotia to get their black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
I would definitely say it'd be Peter and Kevin at the same time.
Okay.
So,
I had a question if it was, I thought it was either them or possibly Shane Rice, because I thought Shane would have got his black belt probably around the same time.
But Shane went to California, right?
Right.
And obviously, which is fantastic what he did, right? So he might have got his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt down there, but I'm pretty sure, because in New Brunswick, Sam Johnston, he's the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in New Brunswick, but they were all roughly around the same time.
Right.
So, you know, it's a good discussion, and I don't have the positive answer, but I'm pretty sure Peter and Kevin, like, you know, I consider them personally like the fathers of BJJ. There's no question.
For sure.
Longest, right?
So then they got their black belts. For those who wouldn't know, they got their black belts under the Team Renzo Gracie banner. They did their training through under Renzo Gracie, a legend in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So then another question kind of came to mind: who would have been the first black belt that actually got their black belt in Nova Scotia? Do you know?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say it has to be someone under Peter and Kevin.
I think I have a guess. I think it's Jarrett McIntosh. That would be my guess. If I remember correct, I think that was the first black belt that Peter and Kevin gave out. Okay. I could be wrong on that. We should ask Jarrett or ask Kevin and Peter who, if they remember.
Yeah, for sure. Because I have a list of all the black belts, and you know, when you go through them all, I mean, there's a lot down in the like Truro ways, like past there, and I mean that has a big history too. Of course, I know a little bit about it, but mostly in the early 90s, mid 90s, I was doing a lot of submission grappling. So, you know, I had the VHS tapes for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I probably should have trained it. But I had
so take us back then when tell us about training in the 90s, because a lot of my students that train nowadays, they wouldn't really know what it's like because they have YouTube now. There's so much information online, but like you said, there was Black Belt Magazine, there was VHS tapes. Kind of walk us through when you were training in those days, like how you got new information and how you kind of went about your training back then.
So I would think those that were training specifically Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back then, they got their VHS tape. You know, obviously there was no YouTube or anything like that, and they would just watch the tape, especially Gracie in action, which you can see on YouTube, right? You could order the Renzo Gracie Craig Kukuk videos. I probably pronounced his name wrong, I'm sorry. And I had a couple of them too. And
those would be technique videos.
Yeah, technique videos. And then just from traveling, right? Traveling down to New York and training. And, you know, it's credit to them. They're still under Renzo Gracie. They've been under him forever, right? They've never switched affiliations. They're still with him. And so in about the mid 90s, they were probably the only guys around doing it in HRM. And so they used to be, like I said, at a Sicilian Pizza down in the basement. And you had like, I think Scott McLean from Fit Plus was there. And obviously Roger Hollett, Ralph Hollett. And I used to kickbox with Ralph Hollett when I was younger. So, and that's just how it got going. Now, there's always been, I think, this thing about, you know, maybe they went like dojo storming and all that stuff, but I've never experienced it. I did have Kevin Taylor and Kyle Sanford come to my club once. I used to be on Oxford Street above this PC Medic, and we just rolled around a little bit, but it was very friendly. And obviously they were just learning, and they were really good at what they did anyway. And I'm sure they went to judo clubs too, but it wasn't like, issuing challenges, kicking down doors and all that stuff. I mean,
it wasn't
they were
quite
young,
the
right?
Gracie challenge.
Yeah, I mean,
more
they
friendly,
were young
more
too.
friendly.
So, I mean, I'm 54 now. We're talking back when we were in our 20s, right?
Right.
But, and through magazines and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And there was talk about Black Belt magazine and like how you got the VHS tapes. Like what were they? And tell us about that.
Sure. Black Belt magazine is kind of like the Time magazine of martial arts. Out in my shed, I probably have about 4,000 of them. And before the UFC came out, probably about 2 years before, you'd always see in the back of the magazine a little article with all the Gracies in it. Enzo, Hickson, Hoyce, Elio Gracie, Horion Gracie, all of them. And it just said, order these VHS tapes, the Gracie, or not Gracie in action, it was like instructional tapes. And that's basically how you did it. It wasn't until just after the UFC came out in 93, probably about 6 months after, that then you started seeing articles all the time in the magazines, and man, God love them for what they did. It was awesome.
So around that time when the UFC happened, 1993, obviously that was a big shift in kind of how people saw martial arts. And from what I've kind of heard from the people that I've trained with and stuff, it sounded kind of like people were more interested in like Taekwondo and karate and kind of the striking martial arts before the UFC came around. Is that correct? Would you say?
What? Taekwondo in the 70s, late 70s, 80s here in Halifax was exactly like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is now.
Really?
It was the thing to do. I mean, Kevin Taylor was a pretty high-ranking Taekwondo guy, right? Competitor and all that stuff. He used to train under a guy named Charles Caravan, who was from Cape Breton, and he had a massive school on Quimple Road, right across from the old movie theater. He had a massive window. People could watch from the outside street and see his school. Anyway, and that was the in thing back then. And so, I mean, Taekwondo was sort of new here, even though there was really traditional Taekwondo instructors in Halifax way before him. And it was like the in thing to do. So in the 90s, when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu started becoming a little bit more popular, it was really hard to get knowledge on or information about it. So wasn't that popular, but then it just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, thanks to Peter and Kevin. And then eventually, when Scott moved to Dartmouth and all the guys down Truro way started doing their thing, just blew up. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I've been really interested in reading about the history of like the Gracies. I read Hickson's book and a couple other jiu-jitsu books. So yeah, it's so interesting. And I find, like in sports and stuff, history kind of often repeats itself, so I'm always kind of looking for like, parallels and things kind of that happened before that might happen again today.
And
tournaments are another interesting kind of topic. Someone asked, when was the first official Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament and where would that have been?
Well, the first official grappling tournament I put on here in Halifax, we put on 2 of them. And then we actually had the first team event. We had Team Nova Scotia versus Team Bermuda at Dalhousie University.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was just, I wouldn't call it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was just grappling. And then Dave McKinnon held one in Dartmouth. He was a Taekwondo instructor, but that's where like Kyle Sanford, Chris, he trains at your club.
Chris Bright.
Yeah, he was there. He competed too. And that was like, they did MMA without basically any rules. It was awesome. I have it all on VHS. And so, but the first official Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament, I would say, was put on by Kevin and Peter, if I'm not mistaken, because I remember Steve Burgess was there too. And that would have been like, what year was that? Maybe in early 2000s or something like that. And then of course, Abaya was the biggest one. Still,
yeah,
they were fantastic. They really put grappling tournaments on the map. I mean, now it's crazy, right? It's just, there's so many of them.
Yeah, no, so
awesome.
many now. So many tournaments around locally and in IBJJF, putting on so many tournaments. And that was another question that came up I'm not sure exactly. I have a pretty good idea, but do you know who the first person from Nova Scotia to medal in the IBJJF
No,
that would be?
no, I didn't
My
follow
guess
that
would be
very much.
Jake. My guess would be Jake McKenzie, if I had to guess.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm
That
pretty
guy's,
sure it'd probably be Jake, but I'm not
can't go
100%.
past him. That guy's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. No, I
Yeah,
thought
it's
you may have
so good
that little
for us.
fact.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm knowledgeable on history of martial arts, including Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but there's a lot of these little things I'm not quite sure on. But it's good.
Yeah, yeah, no worries, no worries. Just kind of interesting stuff to talk
Yeah.
about. So yeah, and when you see now, like there's I feel like it's almost like information overload. There's so much information. It's like drinking out of a fire hose, even more than it used to be for people getting started. There's so much information and so many tournaments going on. It feels like there's a tournament every other weekend, if not every single weekend. So when you look at it now and you kind of see jiu-jitsu, how it's going, you said it kind of reminded you a little bit of how taekwondo used to be.
Yep.
Like what do you think about kind of
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
like
came out at the
where it's
perfect-
headed?
You know what? Sorry to interrupt you. It came out
Go
at the best time, the time of social media, right?
Right.
Here's the question I often ask people. I'll ask you the same thing. What if Ken Shamrock won UFC 1 and UFC 2? You know, we don't shoot fighting right now. No, you know, but hey, what happened? What would happen, right? I mean, after Royce won the UFC and became more popular, Brazilians started leaving, you know, Brazil, coming to US, Joe Moreira. Yeah, first guy here in BC. But the age of social media really, really helped. Really helped.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and it helps all arts because I mean, everything you see in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu today with tournaments and online training videos and everything, karate has it, kung fu has it, tai chi has it, but we just don't particularly maybe look at it. But social media really helped Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu all over at that time period.
Definitely. You can message the top athletes and ask them questions and actually get a response, you know, fairly often.
Yeah.
Like
oh yeah, for sure.
And to train with someone, and I know you've experienced this. I know a lot of people now. You actually have the option if you want to pay someone to come and do a seminar at your gym. You have that option. But tell people about before that was really a thing, how you had to go on your own and kind of travel to train and seek out those opportunities. I know you got some training you got to train with Eddie Bravo, and that was a cool experience. Talk about some of your kind of training trips when you left Nova Scotia to go train.
Yeah, well, in late 90s, I actually traveled to Poland. And so I went to Poland with my judo coach, and we trained over there with the Russian Sambo team. We trained at the Olympic Training Center in Poland. I'm just a green belt in judo, mind you. I'm not no Olympic guy, that's for sure. But it was a great experience. And then many years ago, I decided I wanted to go travel to train in California with all the people that I read about in magazines. And so I took 2 weeks and I went down and I did everything from training with Boss Rutan at his club, Eddie Bravo, Eric Paulson's school, of course, Dan Inosanto Academy. That's the main thing why I went. I even took a 3-day course in ninjitsu with the guy that brought ninjitsu to North America, Stephen Hayes, because I read about him in magazines, and I'm like, oh my God, he's going to be in California, so I'm going to go train with this guy too. Anyway, that's a crazy experience. But Carl Parisian, I got to roll around with him a bit, just meet people. But you know, we've had Royce Gracie here a couple times in Halifax, and you know, it was great. And that's what, if you wanted at the time, if you really wanted to bring people in, because I know, you know, even back when like TJ Grant was training for fighting and stuff, he used to bring in all these people, great people to train with, just like Chuck Sproul and Truro when he brought in Matt Serra and a couple more Brazilian fellas. I don't know their names, I'm sorry. So yeah, but now, man, it's sky's the limit, right?
Definitely.
Anywhere.
Were you there for those training sessions, or were you there when Matt Serra? You mentioned Matt Serra.
No. I wish I would have known about it then, because I was because I've been training since 1975 here in Halifax. I wish I would have known, but Matt Serra back then, he was just young guy. He wasn't even fighting in pride. He was probably just like a blue belt at the time, right? So, but hey, I mean, it's awesome. It's awesome that we had all that. We've had some great BJJ instructors come to Halifax or come to Nova Scotia. But really, when you look at it overall, we have excellent instructors now in Nova Scotia, just the local people. I mean, it's good to go to Brazil and train and experience and get the feel of it, but really, you got everybody here you want to learn from. There's so many good people. They're all great.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And like you said, there's 72 black belts, right?
72, yeah. There's technically 73. A guy named Brandon. He just messaged me tonight. He's like, "Oh, I'm on that list." I go, "Well, actually, you don't live in Nova Scotia, sorry, but so technically 73." So, and,
okay,
it's and that's people that are here in Nova Scotia. Yeah,
right. And I mean, say 10, do you know 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what that would have been? It probably would have been half.
Less than that, right? Because I mean, even at my club, Courtney Pratt, she became the first female, and of course Steve Greencorn, right? And so they were kind of the first in my school, and then Jesse Allen and Jack Cameron and all those guys. And so, but just like Titans, I mean, if you talk to Peter or Kevin, I mean, holy cow, the people they've promoted over the years, and some go their own ways, right? That's how it goes, and that's the evolution of all martial arts. People eventually, some people stay, but a lot of people just go and explore on their own. And you know what? Have a good time, man. Do it.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, martial arts is quite a personal journey, and for myself too. You learn a lot about yourself when you go through jiu-jitsu, or really a lot of martial arts. So yeah, that's
all
really
have
cool
the same benefits. It's just if you're only in one particular art and you don't look at other arts, you may not realize that.
Right.
When we're talking competition, fighting, street stuff, that's all different. But we're talking about what martial arts gives you as a person, as a human being. They all have the same benefits.
Right, 100%.
Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit, just a little bit more about the black belts. So we're kind of agreed that Kevin and Peter are kind of the first black belts in Nova Scotia, and it kind of all branched out from them. Kyle Sanford, Jarrett McIntosh, the list goes on and on.
And Rice, and of course Shane's in New Brunswick, he's promoting people. And
right. And it's kind of gone on and on. So that was kind of, I'd say, like the first wave or evolution of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. Then you had a lot of guys that were like focused in fighting MMA. Roger Holland and Gavin Tucker and Mike Malott.
Kyle Sanford, right?
Kyle Sanford, right.
Shane Rice fought a bunch.
So yeah, the MMA wave was I mean, it's still going on, but yeah, that was must have been pretty cool. I was kind of just getting into jiu-jitsu back, I think, when MMA would have been made legal in Nova Scotia, because MMA wasn't always legal in Nova Scotia. Is that right?
No, actually, there's a shoot fighting club, shoot fighting under Bart Vale. And this is where Chris, your student, trained at. Dave Harrison, he ran a Kempo karate school, but he also did shoot fighting. And he tried to hold the first MMA event at the Halifax Forum. I think it was sold out. Boxing Commission, having really no knowledge of what's going on, shut it all down. And
really?
So, yeah, I mean, so the first MMA event held that Peter put on for ECC, that was a complete sellout, like 5,000 people, right? Nowadays when they hold events, it's, just get maybe a couple hundred, maybe less than 1,000, but it's just the wave. It's just the way things go, right?
Yeah, it must have just been so new and exciting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And people hadn't really seen it. I can remember going to some of those early CCs when Roger Hollis was on a big run, and he had a couple big finishes, knockouts.
Oh yeah.
And it was just so exciting at the time. Like, you hadn't really seen anything like it, especially in Halifax and in Nova Scotia. So
Roger Hollis was like so advanced for us, like for people around here, right? He was just so good that he needed to go fight bigger competition, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I mean, obviously all the guys that got their start, like TJ and just all these other people that just started out. TJ Grant used to wrestle at the Bloomfield School, where I had my jiu-jitsu school was at the Halifax Bloomfield Center. We were in the basement, and we shared space with the Metro Amateur Wrestling Club. And Mike Hallman, who used to teach at my school, he was the guy that co-founded that club. And so anyway, TJ was just a young guy. He was training there wrestling, but I mean, he went on to become, the guy is just so amazing what he's accomplished.
Yeah, he's incredible.
History, right?
And now it's cool because now we're kind of at the point where the people who got their black belts from Kevin and Peter, now they all have schools.
Yes. Or maybe they're doing their own thing and they're promoting their own students. And that's evolution, right? It is. And it's happened to all martial arts. And I always go back real quick. Henzo Gracie said it best. He said, people go where they're meant to be. That's it.
Yeah, good. I think that's a good quote. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's cool now. It's expanding so much, like so much outside of Halifax, just all over Nova Scotia. I feel like you can go to any city, any town around the Maritimes or anywheres around the world now, and there's probably jiu-jitsu within a half hour or 40 minutes.
Everywhere. What do you feel about all the different rules? Like there's the IBJJF and Eddie Bravo's one, and then AC or ADCC, and some are gi, no gi, some are strikes. Like, how do you feel just about all? There's so many rule sets now.
Yeah, I think it makes it confusing for people. For one, for the people doing it, and for two, for spectators. And I find that's a real problem when people want to get jiu-jitsu, say, in the Olympics. We have to have a unified rule system that we can watch it and we all know what the rules are and they're clearly defined.
Right.
It's not that I don't like different rule sets. I'm happy to compete under different rule sets and train my guys for different rule sets. But I feel like we should kind of come together and agree, like, kind of what the rules for gi are and what the rules for no gi are,
Right.
and kind of stick to it. It just makes things confusing when there's so many different rules. Like you don't see that for hockey or for basketball or
Right.
football or for soccer. It's not different rules for the NHL and then crazy different rules for like the Olympics. It's just generally.
From my understanding, like the IOC for the Olympics, when there's like whatever sport is in there, let's say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the biggest organization is IBJJF, but the IOC, they want a lot of control about what goes on.
Yeah.
So are they willing to give up some control in order to be in the Olympics? If they're not, it's hard to say.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And with as big as jiu-jitsu is, it's kind of funny to me that it hasn't been in the Olympics yet. Even when they had the Olympics in Brazil there in 2016 or whatever it was, I thought for sure that they were going to have it then. I wonder now if I'll see it in my lifetime, jiu-jitsu in the Olympics. I hope we do.
Oh, absolutely.
But it kind of brings up another question then, kind of how jiu-jitsu is taught nowadays versus kind of the original jiu-jitsu, kind of more Gracie jiu-jitsu. From what I've read, I'm reading Hickson Gracie's book, Breathe, very good book.
Good book. I read it.
Some more reading on the history of jiu-jitsu. And correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the training kind of back in the day was based more around defense and survival and trying to kind of stay alive. And the argument that they have now is that it's too focused on the submission. Everyone wants to just tap everyone out 5, 6, 7 times around, and they're just trying to focus all on submission. And they say we're losing a little bit of the defensive aspect in jiu-jitsu, which they say is the real kind of Gracie jiu-jitsu. What do you think about it?
Yeah. Self-defense and all that stuff is a huge topic. There's always discussions on it and agreements and disagreements. Really, when the Gracies, I'll try to be real quick. When the Gracies first came out, of course, they were very self-defense oriented. You watch Gracie in action, they just show themselves against other people, showing how it works effectively. And they were all really basic moves, So, I mean, if you took like someone like yourself and transported back to that time and went to get those guys, you'd probably just clean house because it's so advanced, right? Yeah. But yeah, there's always a disagreement in martial arts, and even in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I see it now. Sport, non-sport, self-defense, in the end, just train what you like. And if you want to, if you're a sport person and you want to investigate the self-defense side, that's great. But just really investigate the self-defense side, not just, the techniques you see on video, but all the theory that goes with it, right? There's so much theory when it comes to self-defense. But also, real quick, I always say there's a difference between self-defense and a street fight. Self-defense, someone says, give me your money, right? So you defend yourself. But a street fight, you're walking down the street and another guy's walking, you bump into each other. He steps back, puts his hands up and says, let's go. Now it's different, and obviously if weapons are involved and, but the also thing is reality-based self-defense instructors, most of them have never been in fights.
Right. And I think that's a big thing with self-defense. It's just
Oh, I have
people,
such
we've
a
all
problem
seen the
with that.
videos, the touch of death, you know, they run at them
Yes,
and they not push them out of the way. I
exactly.
think everyone kind of gets a little bit of that idea in their head, but yeah, with the kind of the kick that I've been on lately, it's just kind of come from the reading about the histories of the
Yeah,
Gracies.
it's
And
awesome.
honestly, it's not something that we honestly focus on a lot in our training. Like you said, if you do enough jiu-jitsu training, you're going to be able to handle yourself. It's not like you really need to go through a certain specific set of moves. But now I kind of think more for like the people that are just getting started in jiu-jitsu, the people that aren't, you know, maybe not the most athletic people.
Yes.
And now I kind of think, well, if they're not going to stick around for, hopefully they do, but if they don't stick around for jiu-jitsu, maybe at least I can give them some kind of more basic principles.
Exactly.
And I feel like
How to
around
diffuse
self-defense,
a
that's going to save
situation,
them better
right?
than it would a closed guard armbar set.
Exactly. How to diffuse a situation. Key,
Yes.
you know, key attack patterns. How does a person present themselves? You know, hey, you get out of your car, you're in a parkade and you're walking down a stairwell and someone's walking up and grabs you. What do? Right?
Right.
On stairwell, right? You know, on stairs, you know. I always used to joke with all my students, you know, how do you defend yourself in a phone booth? But nobody knows what a phone booth is anymore. You know, I mean, and I get this question asked quite often. And here's the thing: people ask me, "Oh, street fight, self defense. How many fights have you been in?" Blah blah blah. I always say none, maybe grade 2, quite a few, and all the time. None. Never really been in a street fight ever, except junior high maybe. Punch each other and you walk away. I used to be in retail investigations and I was emergency response team member at a clinical at the psychiatric facility. So I used to have to utilize my jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu, no offense, to control people and control them. And especially when I did retail investigations, I mean, nobody's going to punch a cop mostly, but everyone's going to punch a security guard that tries to stop you if you're shoplifter. So I had to use it all the time. But, you know, only for a couple years. And then all the time when I'm training at the club, you know, like today I was at Halifax BJJ, or actually I was with my Japanese jiu-jitsu crew. We trained for about an hour and a half, and then I went right to Halifax BJJ and did 2 hours of rolling, right? And of course, you know, got whooped by all the blue belts. So I mean, it's okay. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, no, and just like you said, just find what you like and just do it and enjoy it. If you want to do the sport jiu-jitsu, there's so many options to do that. And
Yes.
self-defense, MMA, there's just a lot of great options to.
You have to have the right attributes. Not everybody that takes Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu maybe will become a multiple world champion. Not everyone's going to become a black belt. You know what I mean? And but then again, some people will. Oh, and that's getting back to your question previously about the evolution and stuff, and people learning online. In the old days, let's say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you had to go train with, say, Peter and Kevin all the time, 4 nights a week. There was no day classes. There was no morning classes. You just had to train. But now people can just watch videos online and learn more than maybe what their instructor is showing. And, you know, there's people that got promoted just from training online, like not fully, but they learn that way. I mean, I got Hoist Gracie tried to give me my blue belt twice, and I turned it down both times because when I had him in a seminar, he's like, "Oh man, you've been doing grappling, blah blah blah. You're a blue belt." I go, "Oh no, I'm not. No, because I didn't deserve it. I didn't train. I didn't put the time in. Right? Just an old way of thinking." So, you know, it's like the being late issue. It's an old way of thinking. You never be late for class.
yeah.
But anyway, you know, social media has helped people learn so much and so fast, and new things are being developed. That's a good thing. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the Jeet Kune Do of today. Jeet Kune Do is all about personal development, using what works most effectively, right? Simplicity of movement, all that stuff. That's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Not everything you know is going to work for you all the time, right? You might have, you know, 7 or 8 moves that work all the time for you.
100%.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about clubs. I know you have a list of black belts. We talk 72 or 73 black belts in Nova Scotia. I know you also have an active list of clubs in Nova Scotia. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. It's on my phone.
How many clubs are there in Nova Scotia?
There's 13 in HRM alone.
Wow.
maybe 14 now with Sensei Jake McKenzie. There's, and I think there's like 21 or 23 clubs across the Maritimes. I mean, even in Cape Breton, you have a couple clubs. Actually, Ken Peter used to train Japanese Jiu-Jitsu in my affiliate school up there. But that guy, he's so good too, man. It's just, but he was only a young kid when he was training there.
Yeah,
yeah. So there's a lot of clubs, and the question is it oversaturated? No, it promotes the art. It's good, but what I find is if let's just say you're a brand new instructor that moved here from, say, Toronto, and you just settle in Halifax and you want to open a school. This is my own personal belief. How hard is it going to be to get students when there are already so many schools?
Hard.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult. And here's the other thing I noticed with schools of today. In the old days, you went, say, 3 times a week and trained in the evening. Now it's all about availability. Morning, noon, night classes, which is awesome, which is great, but not every instructor can provide that, right? So,
I would say, I think you would agree, nowadays it's a little bit more about convenience. And in the old days, it wasn't convenient and it didn't really matter. You just kind of had to do it. Like you said, you went and trained 3 or 4 nights a week with Kevin and Peter, and that was it. You either kind of did it or you didn't. But nowadays, I think, which it's good that there's a lot more availability to train and stuff.
Right.
But it's just different. It's a lot more. It's just different. Yeah.
It's availability, right?
Availability.
I mean, some schools, like you said, morning, noon, and night. In some classes, people only go to the morning class. So, I mean, you used to obviously teach too, and you don't see the other people, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when I ran my school, we just mostly we had classes every day of the week, but we tried to get some afternoon classes going. But that's a whole different subject when you're talking about when you run a large big martial arts school with lots of instructors. That's a whole different podcast.
That's a whole different podcast.
The way you're doing it and the way other guys are doing, but one person is the boss.
Yeah, it's the way that I like it for now.
Yeah, no, and that's okay. And I'm not knocking any school because all the schools are awesome and they're doing.
Oh yeah,
100%. No question about it. But in the end, I firmly believe, 1 or 2 people need to sort of be in charge.
Yeah, and a story from the Hickson book that I'm reading, which it just I also kind of discussed this a little bit in the last book that I reviewed. I posted online. So Horian Gracie came to the United States, and his job was to grow Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in America. He came first before anybody else. Horian Gracie. Then Hickson Gracie came. Hoist Gracie came. They all worked for Horian. Hickson said in his book, Horian controlled his money. He didn't really get it first. Horian got his money first. Horian also controlled Hickson's green card. So I'm sure you can tell, like, it's a little bit of a tricky relationship.
Yes.
And then he's working for him. He's doing all this teaching. Hickson's feeling probably a little bit shortchanged. He already paid his dues in Brazil and did all this and that. And he's kind of being forced to pay his dues again in the United States. And then it seemed like there was some type of issue where Horian kind of said, well, I do it or I'll take your green card away or something.
Yeah.
And Hickson said, well, that's it. And then he split from Horian. Not saying it's always that the issues are always like personal like that, but I just see a lot of the same scenarios play out where, just like you said, they have almost kind of too many cooks in the kitchen, where you have a high number of highly skilled people, and they have different ideas about how things should be run or what should be taught.
Of course. And back then, especially, they see it grow and grow and grow.
Yeah.
Even in the Gracie in Action tapes, the first couple times you see 10 people in the gym, and the next time you see 50 people in the gym,
Yeah.
Oh, and Hickson Gracie got his green card because of the fellow I've been training with since '93, Dan Anosano, signed for him, so he could actually get in there.
Love it.
But and that's the way here, right? I mean, some people who train BJJ here, they just love training. Some people are like, oh, I want to teach, and that's great too. But as you know, huge commitment. I mean, you're also sacrificing sometimes your own training, right?
Yes.
No. And then, and depends on how big you want your school, and what you're willing to put into it. So, and it's funny because once in a while, this topic comes up that I don't know who said it. Maybe even I said it. I'll I'll take the blame if I said it, that you can't run a school just with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I might not have said it, but maybe I did one time. But if so, I was proven wrong, and my apologies. Egg on my face, because Halifax BJJ, who we're affiliated with Manimal Athletics, man, those guys are awesome. They're doing jiu-jitsu, and they got the biggest school, probably one of the biggest ones in Canada, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, all the other schools are just, they're great. And that's, there's enough for everybody. But how soon will there be, you know, will there not be?
It's exploding. I definitely had doubts about it too. Just like, could jiu-jitsu exist on its own? Everyone did, because no one had seen it before, really, right?
Of course.
But now you see it, and you see it kind of all over the place. And I mean, I definitely even had doubts myself with like opening my own school. Like, are people going to want to come train with me? Are they going to come out here? You know, I definitely had doubts and questions about it. But I think, just like you said, if you're passionate about it, and I'm very passionate about teaching and about my students, and I know if I put 100% effort into this, there's going to be people that want what I have to give. So so far I've been really, really happy with.
You have a great school. It's, people will drive to it. Obviously you're professional. It's clean. You give everyone your full attention. You answer any question. You don't hold back martial arts secrets from people. And you know, you want people to progress. You know, there was instructors in the past, maybe not in BJJ, but definitely in other arts, that held their students back. They don't want them to get better, you know. And we were trying to promote submission grappling in the 90s around the province. There were certain people who are like, I'm learning this, but I'm not teaching, I'm not promoting people, or I'm not.
And I think it was a little bit of a different culture with martial arts at the time too, where they're like, now with YouTube, there's no secrets, especially with so many people posting their stuff online, because they want to make money and they want to sell their techniques, but also they know they have to put a lot out for free to get people interested. So back in the day, if people aren't aware, it was more like, okay, we know the guillotine, they don't know it. So if we have a visitor, we're not going to show it because he might learn it and teach it to someone else. That's how they talk, right?
Yeah, no, it's the information's out there. So if you're not willing to share it, the student's going to go, I'm going to go find it on my own, right?
100%. Yeah.
No,
So I would say, you know, when it comes to teaching and being a good teacher, like I think Paul Schreiner, or someone that I kind of, you know, respect, I was listening to on a podcast, and they said, to be a good teacher, number one, you really have to know the material and know your stuff, right? Makes sense. Be a well-studied teacher, know your stuff, whatever you're teaching, you should know it. Exactly. And you want to make it fun, right? Which I think is also important too. The class, like jiu-jitsu, should be fun for people. They should want to come back, you know. I think that's also important. People, I think, you know, they just enjoy it. A lot of people just enjoy the camaraderie of jiu-jitsu and being around other people. You know, nowadays, technology and stuff, people are just on their phone so much, and I feel like they just don't actually really like kind of connect with other people like face to face as much. So you really get that in jiu-jitsu, and like the closeness of it, the grappling and stuff, but the connections that you build with people. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's important advice I give anybody, any instructor, and this is, I guess, my saying, the most dedicated student you'll ever have is yourself. And that's it. Because you'll spend 10 years training somebody, and they'll go, lawn bowling is down the street now. I think I'm going to try that. See you later. And you've just invested all your knowledge, all your time, and now they're doing lawn bowling. So I've learned that over the years so many times. I mean, I had students leave me, go claim to teach Japanese jiu-jitsu, say over in Dartmouth, and we'd go over and confront them and basically challenge them. Hey, you're not an instructor, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's back then you could get away with it. And even in HRM, we had some fake black belts in different martial arts, but they all weeded out eventually. More social media came up, and just such, you know.
It's hard to fake it nowadays.
Yeah. So the most dedicated student you'll ever have is yourself. I guarantee it.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it is true. Sometimes it is tough when you put I feel like you put a lot of time and effort into students and some people, and sometimes maybe they just lose the interest in jiu-jitsu. Maybe they find something else, but yeah, that can be kind of challenging. But I would say I feel like I just look at every class the same, and that like, I want to make this the best class. I don't care if there's one person or 10 people, but but I want to have like organized thought or lesson plan on like what I want people to take away out of this. Like last week, I want them just to understand basic punch defense and basic clinch and a takedown. And if they can take that away from this class, then I feel like they got something out of it. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
The techniques that they're learning, you can put them into like self-defense scenarios. So in order to learn this scenario, you need to know this technique, and this technique, right? And then you can add to it, right? That's, it's real quick. It's one of my biggest problems with Japanese jiu-jitsu. And a lot of people often ask, what's the difference? What's the difference? And man, there's so much hokiness in Japanese jiu-jitsu. It's just ridiculous. You look at videos online, it's just, it's terrible. It all boils down to the instructor, right? Lucky for me, in the 80s, I started kickboxing under a guy named Paul Talbot and then Ralph Pollock. And when you train with those guys, back in the early 90s, the rumor was when you trained the Titans down below Sicilian Pizza, you basically got clobbered. Like they were hardcore. They were really hardcore. Well, the kickboxing club that I used to train with was like 10 times worse than them. So I took that mentality of fighting back to with my Japanese jiu-jitsu crew. So there's a lot of hokey things we still do, but you know what? We do them for fun. But then there's the, fighting aspect.
Right.
With the fighting aspect, we're not really fighting anyway. Most of us don't get in fights. So
right.
Yeah. So
and you mentioned to me before too that that the sparring of Brazilian jiu-jitsu is kind of what separates it from really, I think, kind of from all martial arts, and that you can spar pretty hard and be relatively safe.
In judo too, right? Judo, you can spar full out, grapple, throw, no problem. All those sambo, any art that, absolutely. Kickboxing, Muay Thai, North American, you put on gloves, you're going to see who's better. So you need that, to test yourself. So, BJJ is not the only art that just tests itself fully. There's a lot of combat. Karate, Kyokushinkai, they full contact kicks to the body, punches to the face, right? Just depends on the instructor.
Right.
But as you get older, people often say, I can't really, you can train any martial art if you modify it a bit.
Yeah.
You can still do kickboxing. You can hit pads and stuff, but you might not do any more sparring, right?
Right.
I got arthritis in both knees, I'm 54 and I still try to grapple as much as possible. But now, best thing for me is I have no agenda. So
just do it for fun.
I don't care. Yeah, whatever. It's all good, right? I have no agenda, which puts me in no rush to do anything as far as learning belts and all that. I just want to train and have a good time.
Exactly. So another thing I think is kind of interesting that just kind of came to mind when you're talking there, is someone that's seen a lot of the evolution of jiu-jitsu, and I think kind of a newer thing that's come up in the last handful of years is the gi versus no gi wave or debate, whatever you want to call it. Basically, the way I look at it, no gi is really exploding in popularity the last 5 or 6 years, I would say. And I think it's more popular every day. Not that gi is not popular. It's also very popular. But I feel like no gi is just getting popular faster. With my school, I have about 80% of the classes in no gi. Now, I feel like that was not true of most
other
traditional
schools in the city that do that now as well.
Mostly. Yes. Now, what do you think about that? Are you someone that you think you need to train jiu-jitsu in the gi? Do you enjoy doing no gi? What do you think?
I started no gi, but that was submission grappling. So it was a shoot wrestling. So I've always been since the early 90s, more of a no gi person. And then I did judo for years. I had a business partner we ran a club together. He was my judo coach. So we did a lot of gi stuff. So I think it's a good complement to do both. But then you can, focus more on one aspect if you want, right?
Yeah.
This goes like we said about the rule set, Do you fight this rule set, no gi, or do you fight that rule set, no gi? Or, there's so much to it. There's just, it's never ending.
Yeah, never ending.
Yeah.
Never ending. There's always something. And I feel, it's just gotten so much fun. I think maybe the leg locks has a little bit to do with this.
Yeah.
because the leg locks have gotten so popular in the last handful of years too. And I feel like
Students will
people are
probably tell you
really,
too.
really getting into leg locks almost as if that's its own martial art, because there's just so many techniques with the leg
Leg
lock.
lock's been around since the 1800s, right? You know, it's you know, and they've been doing them forever, but they've developed so much.
Yeah.
Like a basic ankle lock now is like, oh, that's old school, right? But if
Yeah.
you crank a basic ankle lock on just a real basic one on someone who doesn't know it, oh, they're, you know, it's good. But
Yeah.
I'm getting to your question. I think your students will eventually dictate, maybe, if they're like, we're going to go somewhere else because we're not doing enough gi classes. Oh,
Yeah.
you should do more gi. Or, you know, I know Gavin Tucker over in Dartmouth. I don't think he does any gi classes.
No.
That guy is so good. I watch his videos. Man, you're all submission MMA wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah. He's specifically training an MMA team for fights. So yeah, I think he's got an interesting approach. It's cool because we bounce some ideas off of each other sometimes, and we definitely chatted when we were kind of, because we started our gyms kind of around the same time, so we were definitely chatting a bit more then. But yeah, I remember talking with him and talking about no gi, and both we kind of felt like that's the way the sport was going, and just kind of, you know, I remember him asking me like, do you think is it cool just to have not any gi classes? And I was like, well, I only have 2 gi classes at my school right now. So yeah, I feel like the more time goes on.
My question I'd ask him, or I apologize, or someone else is, does fighters pay the bills? Having fighters pay the bills. From my experience, because I used to have a pretty good local team we had people compete in you know, in Brazil for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and at the Worlds. We had local MMA fighters, kickboxers, but fighters don't pay the bills in a martial arts club.
Often not. No. Often it's the people that are like the kids, and like the people that aren't fighting, that are more who people would call hobbyists. Those are the people that pay the bills.
Right. That's right. Exactly. And again, it's not a negative comment. It's just, you know, anyone who's ever been in an MMA fight, especially local, I mean, the stuff you got to pay to get, like your medicals, and oh my God, you know, the training is just, you're just an average person with an average job. Maybe it's costly.
Yeah. And I mean, people may not know, but get into it. So there's like, I mean, you got to get like a CT scan, right?
Yeah. There's the boxing commission. I don't want to say anything negative, but I am. A lot of them are just, I don't think they should be doing it. They're just, there's younger people in the commission that are really open to ideas. There's some people in the boxing commission that don't like MMA. They don't like kickboxing. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a fella today. He trains at a really, really good Kyokushinkai karate club. They're like knockout specialists. They tried to hold a karate tournament here, and the boxing commission shut them down. Said basically it's against the law. Like, it's karate, you know? So you have to go through a lot. And my credit, hats off to like FLA and Atlanta Combat Sports too, who try to hold events and deal with the politics and the problems that they have to face. You basically got to, you know, do whatever they say in order to hold an event. It's just,
yeah, I know it's really difficult.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah.
You know? And I've had fighters, MMA fighters, that were in the cage. Read JP Shortall, one of my guys, in the cage ready to fight. He looked over and the other guy wasn't there. Well, where was he? I don't know. He's back in the change room. The boxing commission, they're like, you don't have the right medicals. You can't fight. And then, oh no, on your medical, you have this problem. You get punched in the liver, you're going to die. And, you know, the guy's like, no, my doctor said I'm cleared to fight. And they're like, no, you can't fight. And there you go. Fight canceled right there while in the ring.
Wow.
And yeah, so I mean, anyway, we need new, whatever they call it, combat sports authority. We need newer people with experience.
Yeah, it does seem it shouldn't be that boxing and MMA fall under the same umbrella, and then jiu-jitsu just kind of seems to fly under the radar.
Well, judo is so large. It's provincial. Besides being an Olympic sport, you have your provincial committees, then you have your, you know, Canadian committees, and then that, like, you can't touch judo because they're, You know, they got the money, I think, overall, and to be able to defend it. No, you never touch judo. And that's the other thing I always talk about real quick about martial arts. Judo is probably the only martial art. It's really hard to claim you're not like people like fake black belts. Oh, I'm a black belt in this and black belt in that. But I always joke that judo, maybe Brazilian jiu-jitsu too, but Brazilian or judo is the hardest art to claim you're a black belt in because it's so easy to check.
Yeah.
So easy to check. But they have frauds too. BJJ has people claim to be black belts and they're not. But you can find out pretty quick about them too.
Yeah, no, for
So,
sure.
but
Do you ever see jiu-jitsu getting to the point where judo is with all the different sanctionings and that?
absolutely. All martial arts go through it. They'll eventually have, you know, they've already gone through different waves. When Gracie's first came out, it was the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And then they all splintered and they weren't allowed to use the term Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, of course. They called it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And
Right.
then you have whatever other Brazilians coming over and they're using their name, whatever it is, you know, whoever Jiu-Jitsu. And they just grow and they all go their own different ways. And maybe they try to create like their own different alliances. Like Hicks and Gracie has his own association. You know, you don't hear much about it, but they'll all suffer the same problems in politics that other martial arts do.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
They will.
I think we'll see a lot of the same.
Yeah, and that boils down to the individual clubs too. Even here in HRM, they're going to go through the same problems that Kung Fu people have, karate people have, Aikido people have with clubs. They're going to go through the same issues. No, I've seen it already.
Yeah.
So that's why if you're the boss, you run the class the way you want it, and that's it. Then you know you keep doing your thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Sorry,
I mean, I
ranting.
still love it just as much now as I did, if not more,
Right.
than when I started. So,
Exactly. You'll know there's a problem in your club when you show up and you say, "Hey, I'm Josh. I own the club," and they look at you and they go, "No, you don't." Yeah,
then you have a problem.
That's happened a few times to me. It's like, okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, so I mean, it's been quite a ride for jiu-jitsu in the Maritimes. Like we started out so small, and now, like you said, there's 73 or 72
Yes,
black belts,
72 black belts
in Nova Scotia currently.
Crazy. It's crazy currently. So who's going to be the 100th, right? When will that be?
Yeah.
Who will be
Like honestly, it'll probably, if it's not this year, it probably won't be this year, but it would happen within the next couple of years, I would say. I think there's been 3 or 4 black belts in the past couple of weeks. Like
yes, there has.
Brad Sullivan got his black belt. Abdel got his black belt. Danny Patterson got his black belt. So yeah, and I mean it's all amazing. I'm thrilled for all of them.
And they're not in any alphabetical order neither. When I had the list, I kind of put Peter and Kevin, or Kevin and Peter, however you want to word it, as kind of the first guys, and the rest are just however people sent them to me, like their names. So there's no order on who got their belts first. So just Peter and Kevin.
Yeah, so super cool. So yeah, so we learned a lot. Kevin and Peter are kind of pretty much who started it out. A lot of the lineage, if you have your black belt in Nova Scotia, it's probably connected to them at some point somewhere along the way.
Maybe there's 1 or 2 that maybe not, right? Because I know even at Halifax BJJ, there's a couple of Brazilian fellows that are there.
Yeah, people that move, sure.
Yeah, that moved and stuff. But overall, I'd say at least, you know, even Jake McKenzie, I'm not sure if he trained in Brazil, of course.
Yeah.
You know? So there are.
But he would have done a lot of his training with Kevin and Peter too. So even though I don't think he would have got his black belt from them, there's still a pretty good connection there.
Yeah. So I mean, the lineage is there. So forever in history, those 2 guys can say, yeah.
Yeah. So now so many people have their black belts. There's so many clubs. I think personally, the next kind of wave or evolution is going to be in the tournaments and kind of just more organization of like kind of what the more important tournaments are. I don't know if there's going to be like a BJJ Nova Scotia kind of sanctioning thing, but I think that for me, I feel like that's kind of the next evolution of where.
I know you might have to go, but how do you feel about, they have it in New Brunswick now, New Brunswick BJJ?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I have interviewed Chris Jessold. He's a friend of mine about it, and it's really interesting what they're doing. I just feel like I always say like Nova Scotia is like 5 to 10 years behind the times, if not more.
Right.
It's just kind of always been the case. So I feel like seeing them do it in New Brunswick just made me think, well, it's gonna happen here if they're doing it in New
I
Brunswick.
hope
It's
it
just gonna
does.
take-
I think, how do you
it's gonna take the right person
Yeah.
and the right
how do you keep
people to kind
politics
of
and problems out of it, right?
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and as long as the boxing commission's not in charge.
Yeah, we keep it away from them for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks a lot, Ray. You're a really interesting person to
No,
talk
I
to. You
appreciate
know
your
a lot
time.
about jiu-jitsu and martial arts all in Nova Scotia. Is there anything you want to close with, or anything that we kind of didn't talk about? Or
Oh no, we could talk all night about martial arts, but maybe next time. But no, really, again, just I appreciate your time and everyone. I said I just love training, and I'm still just a beginner in any martial art that I do. And most dedicated student you have here is yourself. And if I can remember this last quote, fraudulent techniques and ideologies. Oh no, comparing martial arts styles is a mindless debate because fraudulent techniques and ideologies are rampant amongst all of them. So
good.
don't compare styles, just train what you like.
Train what you like. I think that's probably the best takeaway from this. Find what you like, train it, and enjoy it. So yeah, thanks a lot, Ray, for your time. It was awesome to chat with you. I can't wait to do it again sometime. And yeah, thanks a lot. I can't wait to talk again and to train with you again as well.
Okay, appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Ray. Have a good night.